Chapter 4 Arboreal Manor, Surrey, England, April 21st, 1889. Sherbet took a moment as they stepped out of the horse-drawn carriage to breathe in the country air, letting their feet sink into the lush grass, still wet with morning dew. The damp spring air hugged their exposed skin, and they pulled their long coat closer to their body as the carriage pulled away, depositing their bags on the ground beside them. Dr. Quakeson had taken the first train they could find out to the countryside, and now, in the early hours of the morning, they arrived at Arboreal Manor, the family home of Easton, Jamie, and of course the Pine family matriarch herself, Strawberry. The manor house itself loomed out of the mist which pervaded the landscape this time of day, towering dark and impressive above the visitor. Ivory stretched up the building's walls, and an immaculate garden bordered the house on all sides, framing the backdrop of farmland which stretched for miles beyond the house itself. Sherbet deposited their belongings on the front veranda and knocked on the large wooden doors. There was no response, as they expected, and after a long moment of waiting, the chemist pulled a key from their coat and opened the door themselves. The sound of Sherbet's footsteps echoed in the spacious, empty hall. "Mumbu?" The chemist called out the nickname and was greeted with only the sound of their own breathing, which steamed in the crisp morning air. They took in the house as they walked through, letting the calming energy of the estate pour over them, washing the bustle and busyness of London from their system. A skylight in the ceiling high above cast an array of natural morning light across the hall, illuminating the countless statues, paintings, tapestries, and potted tropical plants that lined the walls. Occasionally, Sherbet would pass a framed photograph or portrait of Jamie or Easton, and smile at the young children looking absolutely miserable at the prospect of sitting still long enough for the photographs to be taken. Sherbet hung their coat on one of the racks along with their cap, and continued on through the main rooms of the house, letting their feet guide them through the all-too-familiar halls. Before Strawberry had adopted the two children, the house had primarily been home to the goings-on of the Fables Society, the members of which Sherbet caught a glimpse of momentarily, framed elegantly in a large group portrait which had been hung upon a mantel in an adjoining room. Somewhere in existence there was a photograph from their school days which the painting had been copied from, and Sherbet wondered briefly as they walked through the halls who had it now, who had elected to keep that small bit of their life history. It would be nice to see that picture again, Sherbet thought, to see them all together like that again. The Fables Society, Sherbet thought. It wasn't a real order or society, of course. There had always been rumours of sects and societies at Cambridge, but they had not truly been one of them. It was simply a name they had given themselves. Sherbet couldn't even remember why the name had been picked. To the six of them it had not truly meant anything, it had just been, well, the six of them. Barely more than children, still pretending to be adults. The group had seen each other so much more back then in their student days, content to simply spend time together regardless of study or duties, discussing their varied fields of interest. Sherbet almost missed those discussions. As they moved through the house, it was as if they experienced once again in full force the late nights of rambling academic discussions, stretching from sciences to humanities and everything in between. Yes, they were far closer back then, Sherbet thought. Back when they did not have commitments to drag them apart. As their individual passions and research dragged them in different directions, however, one by one they stepped away from Arboreal Manor, and the halls were instead left to be filled with a different kind of immature and often obnoxiously loud noise. Strawberry's adopted children. The society still kept in touch, of course, although for the most part it was through letters, or correspondence through way of their children, who had grown up to follow in the society's footsteps, it seemed. Some were certainly closer than others. Sherbet wasn't even sure they knew what Will or Haley were doing with themselves now. Even David was somewhat of a mystery to them. It had certainly been a very long time now since the group's members had all been gathered together in the same room. "Hello?" Sherbet asked again. They sighed, realizing their mistake. They were looking for Strawberry inside the house. They moved through the kitchen area, passing a series of windows that looked out onto the grounds, and emerged in a large and elegant sunroom, one of many of its kind in the house, which functioned as a large family dining room. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, Sherbet could see their partner far off in the garden, practically dancing through the plants as she tended to them, swaying in the breeze as if she herself were part of the nature which surrounded her, moved only by the whims of the wind. Sherbet couldn't precisely pinpoint the moment when the two of them had begun courting. Perhaps they could trace a rough progression of their romantic entanglement if they looked close enough at their past. Long nights spent together with books across their laps, pressed together on the litany of couches throughout the manor, or evenings sitting together in the garden, talking until the stars rose high above them about plants and their chemical compounds. Officially, Sherbet supposed, they were not technically courting or dating or anything they could truly apply an appropriate name to. They simply were, as they had been for many years now. It was simpler that way, to simply be together as they were, in this unofficial way, even if they both deep down may have preferred more. Sherbet tried to wave through the window and failed to catch Strawberry's attention, which was to be expected. Smirking to themselves and taking a moment to dab at their bleeding eye with a handkerchief, Sherbet let themselves out into the garden. Strawberry turned at the sound of footsteps moving through the grass, her red hair trailing in the breeze as she turned to face Dr. Quakeson. "Sherbet," she beamed, striding across the grass between the flower beds to embrace the chemist in a hug, giving them a quick kiss before turning back to the basket which she had left among the plants. "What a pleasant surprise seeing you today. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Sherbet took a moment to respond, smiling too much for their lips to formulate a proper sentence. Strawberry looked so at home outside in the gardens, barefoot in the grass and dressed in a set of overalls, with a loose-fitting cardigan thrown on to combat the cold morning air. It was hard to imagine her now as she was in the classroom setting where they had first met. Stifled and dusty and warm. It made Sherbet feel even more out of place in their elegant shirt and purple waistcoat. They could feel the urban lifestyle of their workplace seeping from them into the ground, tainting the dirt and corrupting the peaceful atmosphere of the garden. "Am I not allowed to simply pay my love a visit?" they asked after a moment, smiling even more. Strawberry laughed. It was a smooth, breezy laugh, at home in the open air. They looked up from where they were now kneeled on the ground, pruning a mass of blooming flower bushes. "I suppose. Usually, however, a journey this far from London requires a little more motivation." Sherbet tried to avoid the initial purpose of their trip, wanting desperately to soak in Strawberry's lively presence for just a little longer before business was discussed. They pursed their lips, searching for something more to say. "Well, I thought perhaps you might be nervous with Jamie leaving for overseas and all. I figured I could provide some comfort, perhaps." In front of them, Strawberry stood back up, the basket of clippings in her hand, the handle gripped perhaps a little tighter than was necessary. "Well, that's very kind of you, Sherbet." She forced a smile over her conflicting emotion, which still managed to bleed through her expression. Strawberry shook her head, sighing. "What happened to your lab this time? Another accident?" "Oh, come on, the fire incident was one time," Sherbet laughed nervously, following Strawberry as she moved through the garden. They cleared their throat. "Don't you have gardeners or house staff to do jobs like this?" they asked, not for the first time. "I seem to remember there being multiple fires, my dearest, and not all of them were unintentional." Strawberry shot them a knowing glance, and Sherbet blushed. "And yes, I do. Although, as I've told you a million times, it's no fun to simply look at the garden. To really enjoy it, you must tend to it yourself." She ran her fingers along the petals of a large purple orchid, before finally plucking it from its stem gently with a single swift gesture. "Looking at other people's gardens is nice, but it lacks the special place your own garden does. It's like any relationship. You have to care for it, nurture it." Strawberry stepped closer to Sherbet and slipped the flower behind their ear. "It suits you," she smiled. Sherbet leaned forward and placed a kiss on their forehead. "Thank you. And I suppose you're right, as usual. But no, it wasn't a fire. Not this time, at least. Although I suppose it could be an accident, if you wish." They thought back to throwing the glassware onto the ground and winced. "Yes, an accident. I may have run out of a few specific plants, and I figured it couldn't hurt to ask you for some help in their procuring. And it gives me an excuse to come and see you again." They slipped their hand into Strawberry's, intertwining their fingers. "And I would jump at any chance for that." Strawberry leaned up against Sherbet's side, soaking in their warmth in the cool morning. "Well, I can't say I'm complaining, and it explains why you can't simply go to David for your plants as usual." Dr. Quakeson laughed. "David is a dear, dear friend, my love, but his talents at growing plants are a little less specific." For things growable in a city greenhouse or an admittedly rather spectacular apiary, he is wonderful. But for a specific tropical plant such as I might require, you need more specialized touch, I suppose, Strawberry smiled. Shall we continue this conversation inside, perhaps? Over tea? We can work out the specifics of what I need to send you. I can write it all down. I know how complicated you like to make things. Strawberry stepped back, smiling up at them. That sounds wonderful. Sherbet held out their arm. Care for a stroll through the gardens, Mumbu? Strawberry let out an exaggerated huff of mock indignance as she looped her arm in theirs. Only if you stop calling me by that childish nickname. I think it still suits you, as it always has. Sherbet grinned, gently pulling Strawberry along as the pair made their way back to the house through the twisting mazes of magnificent topiary and dazzling flowers, all of which was revealed in its full glory as the sun rose higher and the mist dissipated around them, cloaking the countryside in rich technicolor hues. So how is Easton doing? Mumbu asked as they walked, adjusting the position of the basket of flowers on their other arm. Oh, they're... Easton, Sherbet shrugged. They're surly, as usual, but in good spirits. I have them working on a side project, I suppose. That automaton Ray discovered a few years back. So you got fed up with them, and now they're working on something pointless, Strawberry giggled. Sherbet shook their head. Why does everyone assume it's pointless? It worked once, and I believe it can work again. And I believe that Easton has the know-how of mechanics to get it to that stage. I have faith in them. I see. Well, I appreciate your confidence in my child. Strawberry patted their arm. Does your benefactor share this confidence in the project? Sherbet groaned. Oh, please, you think that cretin has any appreciation for the furtherment of science? Or the betterment of mankind? That greedy bastard is simply hoping we invent something he can get a share of the patent on. Every now and then I throw him a new chemical compound that equates to an incrementally better laudanum, and he throws money at me. He doesn't care what it is we're actually doing. Strawberry laughed at Sherbet's frustration. Of course, dear, I apologize. Although I do think that perhaps you're overly harsh on Lord Charleston. I mean, after everything he does for you, letting you live and work in his properties, supplying funds for your research, not to mention his history with your family. Easton tells me he's quite amiable, really. Easton is mistaken. That man is a criminal and a fraud, and I am devastated that I cannot prove it in a court of law, Sherbet sighed, but their tone was more jovial now than genuinely mad. Although, since you ask so specifically, no. Lord Charleston does not know about the portion of the fund Easton is dedicating to the repair of the automaton. I'm sure he wouldn't complain even if he did know. They had reached the house, and Strawberry opened the doors of the sunroom, allowing them both inside. The rays of morning light had warmed the room, and created a hazy, almost dreamlike atmosphere in contrast to the brisk outdoors. Mumbu called out into the house, and a young woman appeared, flattening out the wrinkles in her apron. Annie, dear, could you bring us some tea? The girl smiled. Of course, Miss Pine, she nodded, turning to Sherbet. It's good to see you again, Dr. Quakeson. The usual. Yes, please, Annie, that would be wonderful, Sherbet nodded, sitting down on a heavily cushioned chair. They turned back to Strawberry, who was now lounging across the sofa. So how has Jamie been doing? Jamie is an adult now, more or less. They can make their own choices. Strawberry did not sound in any way confident about that statement. I have some confidence in Raymond to bring them home safely. Strawberry, they're not going anywhere dangerous. I mean, with everywhere you've travelled, I would think it's not where that I have a problem with, Sherbet. It's when. I mean, this whole trip was organised without anyone's prior knowledge, and it was suddenly sprung upon me. It's like I turned around and my child was gone. I can't believe that he would inform me of this, or take more time to plan. I mean, honestly, Ray knows how protective I am of my children after everything they've been through, and he just... We were all impulsive once, Strawberry, Sherbet shrugged. Ray simply hasn't entirely grown out of his impulsiveness as quickly as you did. You say that like you're not the most impulsive person I've ever met, my love, Strawberry smirked. Sherbet nodded. Exactly. It may be slightly hypocritical to criticize Ray's rashness when you put up with me so much. I suppose, they sighed. Just... Easton was so quick to move out after I took the two of them in. Several years, perhaps, but I just feel that there could have been more time. I fear that I didn't truly spend my time with them wisely. I don't want to lose Jamie in the same way too. To miss out on so much of their life, especially when they're already away in London all the time. I don't want them pulled away from me too quickly, Sherbet. To lose them. I already watched two of my families become scattered to the four corners of the globe. I don't want to watch that happen again. Sherbet frowned, standing up and moving across the room to sit beside Mumbo on the sofa. You haven't lost any family, and you won't lose your children either. Easton gets a little caught up in their work sometimes, but I can encourage them to visit more often if you would like. And I suppose it is about time to call together the Fables Society for a reunion. I believe, apart from Ray's little outing, we're all back in Britain now. With the exception of possibly Will. He could be anywhere these days. They have always had a tendency to go off the grid, haven't they? Strawberry smiled weakly. Thank you, Sherbet. They leaned into Sherbet's shoulder once more. A reunion would certainly be nice, now that we're all a little less stressed and caught up in our work. Exactly. I can have Easton help me draft some invitations when I return to London, perhaps. I believe I have everyone's addresses. If not, I can contact Athena. I believe he keeps Ray's books often. He may be some help. They are such a sweet child, Strawberry muttered at the mention of Athena. I've always held them in high regard. Deservedly so. Athena is quite bright, as is Jamie, for that matter. I think perhaps they would both be more suited to a more scientific endeavour, but I can't change their choices, Sherbet joked. Strawberry shook their head. I would agree. Jamie was always so good with botany. But he can study whatever he likes. Some broadened horizons in the household may be beneficial. A good way to look at it, I would think, Sherbet nodded. Annie appeared in the doorway, balancing several teacups on a silver tray alongside some notepads and pens for the pair. Strawberry sighed, nodding at the girl in thanks. Perfect. Thank you, Annie. And thank you, Sherbet. They added as Annie placed the tea onto the table. Now that our nostalgia is out of the way, I suppose, what was it you were saying about these plants that you wanted? Sherbet blinked. Oh, right, of course. They had momentarily forgotten about the reason for their visit, having been so caught up in the rare, quiet moments spent with their partner. They wished they could have more moments like it. Perhaps they could, now that the children were a little older and they were less busy. Yes, that's what I was here for, wasn't it? They chuckled, reaching for a piece of paper and beginning to write the list of plants, their scientific names scrawled in Dr. Quakeson's fast, messy handwriting.